Modern dünyada hayatın anlamının kaygı yüklü bir şekilde sorgulanmasına yol açan ne oldu?
What happened in the modern world to prompt increasing angst-laden questioning of life's meaning?
I gave a little bit of thought to that. I'm always hesitant to think that the time in which I live is more of something than a time other people lived. But it definitely people are angst-ridden, it seems to me, and I guess I would say I think part of the explanation for that is the loss of the sense of a purpose of life. In the sense, at least in my, in the United States, there seems to be, at least in higher academia, a sense that there is no God that created human beings for a purpose, and thereby people, when they think of meaning, they typically think of purpose. And given that there's no God that created us for a purpose, they tend to think life is meaningless. But people have a very difficult time living with the idea that there is no meaning to life. And so there's an attempt by people in higher education, higher academia, I'd say, that they want to promise, in some sense, there can be meaningful life here on the earth in this life, and so they make promises that they really can't fulfill. That people want certain meaning in life, and when they can't get it in this world, then they tend to despair. I think become depressed, angst-ridden, and so that it's a loss of purpose, and then trying to substitute a purpose of life with some kind of purpose in life just ultimately doesn't succeed. And people find the absence of this kind of purpose of life very disturbing. So that's my attempt to answer your question. Do I really know the explanation for why people are so angst-ridden? That's my best guess. I mean, people, we're beings that try to make sense out of life. We try to make sense out of things. And when there's so much evil in the world and people are unhappy and they can't make sense out of these things, they despair.
Bir nesnenin gayesi varsa, bu gaye nesneye aşkın mıdır, yoksa içkin midir?
If an object has a purpose, is it more reasonable to hold that the purpose has an external source or that it is internal to the object?
It seems to me you have to ask first, what kind of object is it? Is it, as theists, we think that we're created by God, and thereby we are contingent beings, not necessary beings. And so for contingent beings like ourselves, the idea that we would have an internal purpose, I just think doesn't really make any sense. And by contingent beings, philosophers mean beings that exist, but they don't have to exist. And so something must have made these beings, produced them. And because they're produced, they would have to get their purpose from the being that produced them, that made them. So the idea that a created being, a contingent being, would have an internal purpose, it seems to me, just makes no sense, really. If the being is a necessary being like God, then it becomes very difficult for me to think about that. Would God have a purpose as a necessary being? And that's where I'm going to say, I'm not sure what to say about that. It seems to me a necessary being doesn't need a purpose to exist because it necessarily exists. And so it's more difficult to make sense out of the idea that a necessary being would have a purpose. But if it did have a purpose, it would be internal because it's not a created being. It's a necessary being. And there isn't much written on this topic. It's a very difficult topic, but I think that's the right answer. A necessary being, if it has a purpose, the purpose is internal to it. It can't be derived from another being because it's not made by another being. It just necessarily exists. And that would be my answer there.
Sonsuz bir hayatın sonunda sıkıcı olacağını düşünüyor musunuz?
Do you think an immortal life eventually would become boring?
Well, it would all depend, I suppose, on what makes life or existence worth having or living, what makes life worth living or existence worth having. I'm someone who believes that what makes life worth living is happiness, and happiness consists of experiences of pleasure, and so that an immortal life would not become boring so long as the experiences of pleasure and thereby happiness continued. And I don't see anything problematic with the idea that God could continually supply us with experiences of pleasure. And given that God could do this, eternal life would not become boring. Quite frequently, people think that, well, whatever activity we're performing, at some point we're going to get tired of performing that activity. And, so that, sometimes I enjoy reading books. I get tired of reading books. Sometimes I like to play a sport. I grow tired of playing a sport. Could be in politics. Somebody gets tired of running for office in politics. But these are matters of the activity that produces the pleasure. And I don't see why, number one, pleasure has to come always through an activity. It might be provided directly without an activity. But certainly God could set things up, it seems to me, that we could perform one or a whole variety of activities where these activities produce pleasure, and it's the pleasure that makes life worth living. It makes existence worth having, and there's no reason I can see why that couldn't go on in an immortal life. So that would be my answer to that question. No, it won't necessarily. It doesn't have to become boring.
Yaşam amacının kusursuz mutluluk olduğunu savunmak mantıklı mı?
Is it reasonable to maintain that the purpose of life is perfect happiness?
Yes, I absolutely think that's reasonable, something reasonable to maintain. Why? Well, because happiness is that which is intrinsically good, and God would create us for what is good, and perfect happiness being intrinsically good, it makes perfect sense to think God would create us to be perfectly happy. How will we be perfectly happy? In other words, what is the means to perfect happiness? Well, I take it it's going to be having a relationship with God for sure. But beyond that, I think we just have to say probably we don't know what will be involved in our experience of perfect happiness as the means to it beyond worshiping God. But I'm perfectly content with saying I don't know that. But is it reasonable to maintain that the purpose of life is perfect happiness? Yeah, I don't see why not. Again, it seems perfectly reasonable. I've yet to see an objection that persuaded me that it was unreasonable. Most of the people I know, indeed, I'll go so far as to say all the people I know in my life, they want to be happy. And they want to be happy in this life, and they would like to be happy, I'm sure, if there's an afterlife in the next life. So perfectly reasonable.
Kant'ın ahlaki argümanı sizin için kayda değer midir? Argümanını ve olası itirazlarını nasıl değerlendiriyorsunuz?
Is Kant's moral argument remarkable to you? How do you evaluate his argumentation and possible objections to it?
No, this is a tough question, because you have down here premises and a conclusion. So you have there's your premises. We ought morally to promote the realization of the highest good. What we ought to do must be possible for us. It is not possible for us to promote the realization of the highest good unless there is a God who makes that realization possible, so God exists. I'm favorably inclined. In other words, I view positively this kind of Kantian argument. My only concern would be, is it possible for me to promote the highest good? I think perfect happiness has to be received as a gift. It's really not something I can bring about myself in the sense that I would act to produce it. I believe, Kant, and I would tend to agree with him, what we are called upon to do is to behave morally, act morally, do the right action. And by performing the morally right actions, we in some sense are made fit to receive the perfect happiness which we desire. However, I can't produce that happiness on my own. All I can do is, in Kantian language, do my moral duty and then trust God to provide the happiness that is appropriate for my having done my moral duty. So I act not for the sake of producing my happiness, my perfect happiness. I act for the sake of being moral. And then I trust God to provide the happiness which I so deeply desire. And that happiness can't be realized without God's existence as the provider of it, because we can't get it ourselves. It's obvious we can't get it ourselves in this life. There's so many people are unhappy. The world is filled with pain and suffering. There must be an afterlife where this kind of happiness is available, and only God can provide it. So that's, I think, the best way I could address that question.